Hello, everybody, and welcome to another week of the Logos of Agape podcast. I am here, as always, Kyle Priestley with Chris Barber. Chris, how about them Cowboys, huh? How about them?
Well, I guess we'll see. It's happened. We're going to be facing you
There's a lot of
this
love on
week.
my side towards the Cowboys, and I don't have a lot of love towards your 49ers right now. People are not going to, they listen to our podcast, they're going to think that we're a mini sports podcast. It won't last
It won't last much
forever.
longer, especially after this week. One of us won't want to talk about it, so I won't say who,
Yeah,
but we'll
one of us
see.
won't want to. One of us will still want
You
to.
know,
So
it's a little ironic. We are going to be talking about Agape today, which I don't want to give any spoilers, but it is about enemy love sometimes in some ways. And I guess for this week, at least in the sports realm, Kyle and I are enemies just for this week. But with that being said, I wonder what Agape has to say about your enemies. So we'll get into that in just a moment.
I guess we will. Way to make it spiritual, Chris. We can turn things around there.
All right,
We'll see how it
exactly.
goes. I was happy last night to at least end Tom Brady's season, maybe career. We'll see. It's good to finally, after him being in the league 25 years, to actually have a win over him. So I'll take it. I'll take it. I don't
I don't know
feel
if he's
super confident going into this weekend, to be honest with you, but I'll take it.
I don't know if he's ever going to retire, but that's another topic for another day.
We'll see how our field goal kicker does, and maybe he doesn't miss 5 straight field goals for 20 yards, and we'll see how we go.
It should be a good game. I'm not overly confident one way or the other, so
Sunday night, 6:30,
I will
right?
be in California.
No, oh, wow, okay, it'll be 2:30 for you then.
I'm watching it with my uncle.
All right, well, good.
Excited for that.
You should
So
go to the game if you're gonna be anywhere near it.
I would love to. I think it might be a little bit out of a price range, but that's okay. I will enjoy watching it in on the screen with my uncle, so it'll be good.
Oh, good stuff. All right, so this week's episode is going to be on Agape, as you had mentioned. A little bit of a spoiler there. So let's go ahead and get right in. Agape.
All right, yeah. So this week is on Agape. Title of the episode would probably be just "What is Agape?" and "What does it mean that God is Agape?" Right. So we'll jump right in. We've talked about it just as like a slight preview and a couple of other shows. It's kind of hard to avoid it. Our show is all about the logos of love, the logic of love. If you listen for episode 2, you'll know what I mean. Why I called it the logic there. And now we're going to jump into what is love. Specifically, what does the Bible mean when it says God is love? And it uses the word agape. But there's a reason why this is really important to get right. When I use the word love in English, I am being very imprecise, or at least compared to the Greek audience that they would have been writing to when the scripture was produced. So you've probably heard it said. You've probably heard it said before, Kyle, that there are many different Greek words for the word love.
Yes.
All right. So you've probably heard that. How
Filet,
many do
which
you think there are?
nobody likes filet. What filet?
Phileo? Yeah.
Phileo.
So how many do you think there are? You don't have to name them. I'm not even going to name all of them.
I
But
can really
there's
only name
actually
2 off the top of my head that I can think of right now, and that'd be filet and agape. And I know. Oh, come on, what's romantic love is
eros.
eros. That's right. Yep.
Eros. Yeah. So yeah, there actually some debate on how many there are. The Bible really only uses 3. You mentioned 2 of them. Eros is not mentioned um, in Scripture, anyways. But the other 2 that are mentioned, so there's agape, there's phileo, there's storge, and then there's so those are the 3 that are mentioned in the Bible.
Storge parent.
Storge is actually familial love. Now you might be
Okay, so
confused if you're familiar with phileo, which is how we get our word Philadelphia, brotherly love. but that means more like common love. It's like love based off of common interest.
Yeah.
So you and I do not have common love this week because you're rooting for the Cowboys and I'm rooting for the 49ers. But in general, we have phileo love just because we both like football. So there you go.
Right.
No, but in general, phileo love means just a common interest that cause you to, I don't know, kind of like the term birds of a feather flock together. It's
Hmm.
kind of like that. Storge means familial love, basically. Um, but you have all sorts of other ones. Lourdes, I think it is, means like flirtatious love when you think of like flirting. And then you have eros, which means like love full of desire. But what I want to start with is it's it's actually inaccurate to say that I would say that there's 7, 8, or even 9 words in Greek that could convey an aspect of what we call love in English. But it's actually inaccurate to say that all those different words mean love because our English word love didn't come first. When they said storge, they weren't thinking, "Oh, this is one aspect of a word that's going to come into existence in the future." No, they just thought, "I'm talking about my family and the fact that I love my family, and so therefore they use the word storge." They don't think of it as different parts of the word. So what I'm trying to get at here is our word love is very imprecise in English. I kind of wish it wasn't. I kind of wish we would use different words for the different types of love that we're trying to describe right here, right?
Hmm.
Because it's more precise. And Greek in general is maybe a little more precise. It's not always more precise, but at least with this, we use the word love the same way for, like, if I'm talking about my wife and the fact that I have desires for her, as I would for like my brother or my friend that I have a common interest with. We use the word love in all of those different situations, and instead they break it down. They're like that. They don't think of it as another type of. They don't think of it as love. They think of it as just this word that describes a certain affection I have towards somebody, and they have a specific word for those different functions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I followed.
So the problem that we have when we just say that God is love is our English word is very imprecise and it conveys a wide range of meanings that in the Greek, those words didn't convey the wide range of meanings. They meant exactly what they meant. And so today we want to talk specifically about the word agape, because the word agape is the one that we keep saying is God is love. What does it mean that God is love? So that's what we're kind of getting into today. And so I think it's very important because of the impreciseness of our word love
Hmm.
in English. So,
Okay.
any questions there before we move forward here?
No, I am tracking with you.
All right. So general question then would be, well, what's the difference between love in English and the Greek word agape? And I'll even bring in, I'm going to, a little bonus today. I did use agape and we're going to use agape primarily, but
Hmm.
also the Hebrew word ahava is the same word. Well, it's the Hebrew word that gets translated agape in the Greek translation of the scriptures. So, and it gets used almost exactly the same way as agape, which I'm a little surprised at. It doesn't always work that way, but the word ahava is the word in Hebrew, and then agape is how it gets translated into Greek, and I think fittingly so because they're used very similarly. All right. So, what I want to do is without going into more detail on what agape actually is, I want to ask you, Kyle, just in general, um, what do you think agape is?
So I've always understood. I've always understood agape as um like unconditional love. That no matter what you do, you're going to still be loved, and it's not based on your performance or what you do. It's unconditional. I love you no matter what.
Okay. So that's actually like I would consider that. I think it's good. But I would consider that like a secondary descriptor.
Okay.
Love is unconditionally what, Kyle? So like, help me out, fill it out just a little bit more. If you were to say love is unconditionally what towards a person,
No strings attached is what how I like love is unconditional. That's
so is it unconditional kindness? Is it unconditional um, want a desire for the other person? Is it unconditional service? Is it unconditional desire for their well-being? What? How would you finish that sentence if I asked you? I
all of
understand the
the
no strings attached part, but that's
all
not.
of the above. That's how I've always understood it was like as far as like and why I thought of it as God is no matter what you do, God is still going to love you. There's nothing you can do to unearn to take away his love or your ability to.
Right.
So all those things, his kindness for you, his gentleness, all those aspects that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13, all those things are unconditional no matter what you do.
Okay. So you would just say it's First Corinthians 13 unconditionally, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. That's good. So there's a problem if we're going to define love that way.
Okay.
And I'm going to share it with you right now. Okay. Um, more and I'll leave it that just the way that you described it, but I think most people would also add in like an altruistic version of love, meaning wanting someone else's good above or wanting someone else's needs met above their own. Some wishing their well-being above my own and my actions following that. So that's kind of an altruistic type of love. But there's a problem with either your version of what you thought agape was or their version, that other version, the altruistic version. Um, and that is that agape isn't always used that way. Now, agape has a central meaning that it's always used as, but it's not always used that way throughout the scriptures. So let's talk about some of those ways. Okay.
Okay.
Um, for example, John 3:19. Now you're probably familiar with John 3:16, right?
Yes.
What does that
And
say, Kyle?
3:17. I know both of them.
Okay, great.
For God so the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. 3:17. For God did not send his world into the for God did not send his Son in the world to condemn the world, but that through him the world might be saved.
Okay, great. So you know those, right? And
Yes.
that you would have no problem with saying that's the type of love that you were describing.
Yes.
How about John 3:19? And this is the judgment that the light has come into the world and people loved the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. So they loved the darkness
Is it
altruistically. They loved it unconditionally. What's
is
the
the word in
definition?
Hebrew or Greek
The word
agape?
in Hebrew is agape. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Here's another one. Here's another one. All right. Um, how about First John 2:15? Agape, not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man agape the world, the agape of the Father is not in him.
Okay.
All right.
That's First John 2:15.
First John 2:15.
Okay.
All right. So does that mean that we shouldn't love the world unconditionally? All right. Let's continue.
I
Let's.
don't have an
I,
answer
I
for you
picked I
yet.
picked a, I picked a couple from the New Testament. Let's look at the Old Testament, and this would be the word ahava, but then in the Greek Septuagint, when they translated it to Greek, they used the word agape. Okay, these
Okay.
ones are even harder to wrap your mind around. All right, so First Kings 11:1. King Solomon, however, agaped or ahavad many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. He agape Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites?
Probably not what I would have when I would have read the word love in that context. Would have thought of it that way. I
Yep.
would have thought more of the eros, since that's
Yep.
what you thought he was always getting at. So the fact that it's agape kind of changes things.
All right. And then how about this one's the worst? It's by far the worst. That one's bad. This one's worse. 2 Samuel 13. Um, it's
13:1.
verse 13. Sorry, 2 Samuel 13, and we'll do verse 1 and 2.
Okay.
In the course of time, Amnon, the son of David, fell in Agape. I don't think I like this translation, but Agape Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. A little bit later on, he literally, um, for lack of a better term, he forces himself on her.
So the word agape in that sense, though, would also mean eros, though, at the same time, wouldn't it?
We're going to get to what's happening here. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to be able to explain all these different instances to you. Okay. And to where I think they will make sense. Okay. So if we just say that agape always means this, we have a problem. Agape is not always used in the special sense that we use the Christian term agape. Okay. Um, and so I think this is going to be important because our goal here is to understand how God is love all the time. If you don't understand agape and its root meaning, and then later when it gets used in that way, then you're gonna when you come across these verses, you're going to be like, what the heck is going on? Especially when, and we're going to talk about it in just a second, especially when the words that mean the opposite of agape get used, and they get used of God having the opposite of agape. So we need to understand what's going on so that we don't get confused and think God also does the opposite of agape sometimes. Okay? So
Yeah.
or the special version of agape. And
Right.
we're going to get down to it. Just like logos, it has a common use and it has a special use. Okay? So when we talked about logos, we talked about the common use and then we talked about the special use. Agape is the same way. All right. Now, let's go ahead and go into what I actually think agape means in the common use. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's transition to that. So agape always means, in my personal opinion, it always means preference, and because it means preference, it means choice. Okay. Always means that. So like if you were to go to each one of those verses that we just talked about, let's pick the first one, right? So
So
the first
John
one said,
3:19.
yeah, first sorry, not first John. John 1:19. Let's take that one. Okay? So John 1:19, sorry, John 3:19, sorry, said, "This is the verdict: light has come into the world, but people agape darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil." What's being said there is that people preferred darkness to light, and they're choosing it over light. They have chosen that. Okay? Now, almost every time, I think pretty much every time it's used in the common use, you can tell that it's a matter of comparison. Okay?
Yeah.
So John 3:19, he's comparing light and darkness, and he's saying that people preferred and chose darkness over light. Okay? Let's do the next one. 1 John 2:15. Agape not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If anyone agapes the world, the agape of the Father is not in him. What's the comparison? The world and the Father. If you read further down, like I don't have the whole passage up, But if you read it, it's basically, do you prefer the world to God? Are you
Okay.
choosing the world or God?
Yeah.
Okay. Old Testament, Second Samuel. No. Let's do the first king one first. King Solomon, however, preferred. Let's just substitute the word preferred. Preferred many foreign women. I don't even have to read you the rest of the passage or the passage before it. What's the comparison? Foreign women to
God.
Israelite women,
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
right? That's the comparison.
Yep.
He preferred foreign women instead of women from Israel.
Yeah.
Just call it what it is. All right. And then like trying to accentuate the point by listing a bunch of different foreign women. All right. And then when you get to the Samuel one, the general point is that he preferred his sister to any other woman that he could have.
Not Samuel. The
Oh no,
other.
not Samuel. Sorry, no, that's Amnon.
Yes.
Amnon in 2 Samuel 13, verses 1 and 2, and then throughout the rest of the passage. So we've established the Old Testament understanding, and like now we're talking about preference, right? Um, so now there's a bigger problem that arises when we understand this as preference, and that is that we also get God doing the opposite, and even God instructing us to do the opposite. And these words are missio in the Greek or sane, and I might be mispronouncing the Hebrew. I'm not as fluent in Hebrew as I am with Greek, but sane in Hebrew or missio in the Greek. We translate that as hate. Okay, so let's look at a couple of those. But I think you'll see that the comparison is there.
Mhm.
All right, so do, do one for me. Do John 14:26. Do you have that one, Kyle?
Luke 14:26.
Luke 14:26. You're right. I apologize.
Okay. So Luke 14:26. If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else, your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple.
Okay. Um, it's interesting. Whatever translation you pulled up, put the word comparison in there. So that's great.
Mhm.
That it's not in the Greek. The only thing that tells you that's a comparison is the fact that it's um,
I'm
the
an
context
NLT.
is telling you
I'm
that
an
it's a
NLT
comparison.
guy, so just know pretty much anything I read will probably come from an NLT.
Okay, gotcha.
Some
All
people
right.
may call me a heretic for this, but NLT is that's
Y-
my bread and butter.
No, that's great that they put in comparison in there.
Yes.
Almost no other translation puts the word comparison there. I personally think it should be in there. So there you go.
Well, read the NLT. There you go.
All right, there you go. So yes, so there is the word that's the opposite of agape. Literally, it's corresponded as the opposite of agape all the time,
Yeah.
and it's saying that we should do missio, the opposite of agape, to parents. But here's the thing: we're not saying literally. Basically, what I'm saying is hate is a bad translation of that word. It's not saying that you should hate your parents. Okay. Let's use another one. Matthew 6:24. Matthew
Matthew
6:24.
6:24. Matthew 6:24. Okay.
All right. What does that say?
So Matthew 6:24. Again, this is Jesus. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money.
Okay. So um, we think that this is teaching that we should literally hate money. Um, but the point is not that we should hate money per se. What it's saying is you can't prefer money to God.
Sure.
And if you even take out the second half of the verse and just say, no one can serve two masters, if you have two things that are your authority,
Yeah.
at some point they are not going to have you do the same thing. And you will have to choose, there's the word choose again, which one you are going to prefer to obey.
Hmm.
So that does not necessarily mean that you hate the other. Like, for example, I'm not a child anymore, but like let's use children. Okay.
Yes.
If your parents tell you something, but you feel like God's told you to do something, and you have, or I don't know, I'm not, I can't think of like a perfect example here, but the general premise is you have two people who are in your authority, God and your parents. And just because you decide I'm going to obey my parents in this instance doesn't mean you hate God. And just because you're saying I'm going to obey God in this instance doesn't mean you hate your parents.
Hmm.
All it's saying, literally, the only thing it's saying is you are preferring one to the other. You're going to be able to obey one and not the other.
Yeah. Which
Okay.
I would kind of think that the writers were using that word in what we've translated as hate, because we have to think, what's the opposite of love? It's hate.
Hmm.
And so if in our English language you can only have two words, it makes sense that we're going to simplify it down to one word as hate, even though hate can have more than one meaning. We don't think it does, but often, because we think hate usually very strongly. But even in the sense that we say things, I hate the 49ers. I don't really hate the 49ers. I just
Yeah, you
strongly
do.
dislike
Yeah,
the
you do, Kyle.
49ers.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, no, I
No,
hate I hate the Wolverines. I don't hate the 49ers.
all right, gotcha.
Um, I'd,
No,
I'd I'd also wonder then if that other word in there is even like enslaved. Is the word enslaved even actually enslaved?
well, I'd have to go look at the Greek, but
Okay, that's fine. I don't know if you know off the
uh,
top of your head. So
that's not as important to our
yes.
conversation. But um, another couple of examples. First John 2:15, which we already read, is basically saying that we should mizio or hate the world.
Hmm.
Um, Another example was the light and darkness. Um, so you have all these different things. Also, if you go to the Old Testament and you get to 2 Samuel 13, where he agapes, if you will, he prefers his sister over everyone else. Later, it says that he mizioed her in the Greek translation. Basically, after he takes her for himself, he then, after he does so, he then says, it says that he hated her. It's probably not that he hated her. It's probably more he completely neglected her afterwards and was no longer interested in her. And
Hmm.
now he was more interested in other women. Just being honest with you. Um,
Yeah.
so like that's the way that it's used. It's used to denote a preference. And this becomes very important because, and I'm not going to go there. If you know your scripture at all, you can go read them yourself. Okay. But it says several places, it says that God mizios. So I'll give you a couple of examples. The one example that I'll give is throughout the Psalms, it's constantly saying that God mizios the sinner or the oppressor. Um, but the context there is that what we're talking about is he prefers or shows favor to. Favor is another word that I think you could substitute in there.
Hmm.
He prefers or shows favor to those who do what is right, those who love him. We're told in the scripture over and over again that he's going to show favor and lift up the one who does what is right, and that he will shun and correct and not show favor to the one who does evil or wrong. Okay. So every time I was listening to a somewhat famous pastor recently who basically said the famous saying, um, hate the sin, love the sinner is nonsense because
Love the sinner,
God
hate the sin.
hates sinners. And I'm like, no, you don't understand what the word you don't understand the word mizio, or in that instance, the
I have
Hebrew word.
never in my life, I'm sure there's pastors. I don't know who said that. I have a few ideas, but I've never heard any pastor until now actually say
Okay.
that God actually hates the sinners. So
Um,
that's a new one on me.
there's a
But
there's a few who have done that. And then another really famous one, like really famous one, is Jacob and Esau. Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated. That doesn't mean that he hated Esau. What it means is he chose and preferred Jacob. Now, let's talk about this just a little bit more so that we can understand the word agape more and the word missio more, because it's important. I think it's very important. If I'm telling you that God agape is everyone,
Hmm.
and then like in our show, and we're constantly saying that, and then the implication that we would have in our culture, in our English culture, Western culture, would be then to assume that God doesn't hate anyone, then, because hate is the opposite of love in our culture. So then you come across a bunch of Psalms that says God hates the sinner, or a bunch of, or two specific verses, one in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament that says God hated Esau. Okay, well then everything that I'm saying is nonsense, right?
Hmm.
So we need to understand this a little bit better. So let me explain that agape is a word, and this is probably why. Sorry, let me finish my thought. Agape is a word that is void of emotion. It's about choice, it's about preference, but the emotion is it doesn't matter.
Can you
Okay.
expand on that a little bit more?
Sure,
I
sure.
have a hard time grasping how any type of love can not have emotion, since it is
So
also
it's
an
not
emotion as far as what we feel.
emotion does not dictate agape, and
Okay.
emotion doesn't dictate missio.
Which kind of
Okay.
goes with what I said at first for unconditional, regardless of what I feel, I still love.
This is why agape is unconditional.
Okay.
When we get to that aspect, the special aspect, this is why it is, because it's not dictated by emotion. Okay. So like let me give you some examples. All right. So like let's say I go I go to sleep every night. Shocker, huh? I go to sleep. And um when I do, I like to go to sleep in the same bed with my wife. Um I also have a daughter and a son. I have a 6-year-old son, turned 6 today,
You
and
have
an
two
8-year-old
sons.
daughter who would really like to sleep in my bed with me every night.
Yep.
It's a constant question. I wouldn't say it's every night, but a regular basis.
Yeah.
Now, you could rightfully say that I agape my wife and that I missio joy, okay, in that
Yeah.
instance. But my daughter loves to play cards, loves to play board games, and my wife's not all that into it. But I enjoy playing. So, an instance where I might want to play a board game or something, you could easily say that I agape, I prefer to play with my daughter, and I missio Kate, my wife.
Yeah.
So the word, it doesn't have anything to do with emotion. I'm not having a negative emotion towards my daughter Joy when I tell her, no, I'd rather sleep with your mom and sleep in the same room with your mom and in the same bed with your mom tonight. Just as I'm not having a negative emotion towards my wife when I say, I'd like to go play a board game with Joy, and you don't even particularly like board games, so I've chosen that.
Right.
Okay, it can even be something even more fundamental than that. Like, if I have a job to do, let's say I have a job. Okay, let's say I'm a boss at a place of work, and I have two people interview for the job, and I like them both. I think they're both really good people. Don't even really think one's better than the other. But the job is loading heavy boxes out of a truck, and so one of them is, I don't know, one of them is really big and strong, and one of them, uh, I think they're really smart and analytical, but I don't think that they would be as cut out for that job. You could
Right.
easily say that I agape one and I missio the other. It has nothing to do at all with my general feelings towards that person.
Right.
All I'm saying is I have preference in this given situation for this specific job or entity for this one over that one. And so therefore I'm choosing one. Okay.
Sure.
Now,
You could do it with food and restaurants too, pretty
right,
easily.
right. Now it can, like for example, the two instances, not the two instances in the New Testament, but the two instances in the Old Testament, it can be dictated by lust or desire, right?
Yeah.
Solomon, Amnon, and his sister, like, okay. I'm not saying that it can't be directed by that, but the purpose of saying agape and missio are not to designate what type of emotion you have towards the individual. In
Sure.
fact, we talked about it, we hinted at it at the beginning of the episode, but Jesus is pretty much saying all the time, you can't follow your emotions.
Right.
Love your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Pray for those who persecute you, right?
Yep.
That automatically disqualifies kind of the emotional attachment to it. All right. So agape simply means to choose. And if you have a certain task in mind, it just means to choose or to have a preference towards something. And then missio just means that you weren't overlooked. Now, I want to take another minute or two to say that missio can mean hate. Missio has a wide variety of meaning. Missio can mean hate when it is attached to hatred. So, like, for example, when Jesus says, do not be surprised when the world missios you because of me and persecutes you. That word persecute is the word missio. You can easily, I'm okay with you translating it hate there. What it's talking about is hating someone, missioing someone because you dislike them. This, you can even use it in terms of like prejudice, right? We
Yeah.
can experience missio or this word missio. So it could be translated as what I'm trying to say a lot of different ways. Okay. It could be, but sometimes, and probably a lot of the times in the New Testament, it could simply be translated as disfavored or didn't choose, basically, especially when in reference to God. So, God, and this is why, in the passage in Romans 9, where he uses Jacob I have loved and Esau I have hated, a little bit later, Paul says God shows no partiality. So basically, he chose Jacob because he wanted to choose Jacob. It had nothing to do with him being partial towards something in Jacob, but rather just that he chose Jacob. All right. And that he didn't choose Esau, but he didn't have a partiality towards one or the other. Now, so we can experience missio. Let's just clarify this one last time. We can experience missio for all sorts of reasons. Like if you and I are up for a job and they think of us equally, but you're friends with that person, I could experience missio just because they have a favoritism towards you. Like, okay, then they picked you, they preferred you over me, but it could just be that they like you better or for whatever reason. That's not because they hate me, it's just that. But then we can also experience it. I mean, we've seen in our world in like racism, all right? Like that's definitely missio, but it's now crossed the line into like prejudice, hatred,
Yeah.
right? But the difference is where's the emotion? Is the emotion because they dislike you for whatever reason? Or is it because they just have favor towards this other individual? Okay. Um, so that is the general use of agape. And it's very important to understand because otherwise you're going to be confused if you look up the word agape and find all these references where it's not describing like an altruistic, unconditional love. It's just describing a preference. All right. So that's the common use of agape and missio. And it's very important that you understand that just because if you read the scriptures and you see those words used, you could become very confused because you don't understand the common use of agape and missio, and specifically agape, since that's what this podcast is about today. Any questions on that, Kyle?
Yeah. So within the Christian world, then how we've gotten the alternative terms, where does that come from?
Okay, yeah. So why on earth, if that's the common use of the word agape, why on earth would they use that as the word to define God, right? In
Right.
John 4. Um, God is agape. Why would they do that? Okay, so let's talk about it. And it's not just God. I mean, God, you know, agape the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Agape your neighbor as yourself, etc. So there's a special use of the word agape, and that's when, remember how I said it's a preference and it's used in comparison? When it's not used in comparison, it's actually being used in that special use. So it's like it's being used in a vacuum. So, for example, Kyle, if I were to say, Kyle, I agape you,
Hmm.
no other strings attached, not I agape Kyle compared to I don't know, my dinner, whatever. Um, but I'm just saying, no, I just agape you.
Hmm.
How that came to be understood is I'm saying that I prefer you over and above myself.
Which makes sense.
That's how the word became used.
Yeah.
Another way to put it is I choose you over myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can see how
So
that easily could have gotten to that and be put into play. That makes sense.
right. So it was used in that special way, but I gotta be honest, the Greeks didn't use it very often.
Yeah.
But it was already used that way before the Christians decided to write the New Testament. And so they're like, that's the one. Of all these different words that we think mean our English word love, they're like, that's the one. The one that says that um, God preferred us over his own self. The
Yeah.
fact that, and this is like, this is insane that it's the word that the Christian authors thought best conveyed what's going on with God, but we're literally saying that God preferred us over himself, even to the point of self-sacrifice.
Right.
That's what we're saying. And then everything else that you tried to say earlier comes sweeping into focus. All right. It's that's why it's unconditional, because we're talking about a choice of preferring you to myself, which means that I put your needs in front of my needs. I put your well-being in front of my well-being. It means I put your wants in front of my wants. And so now when you say God agaped the world, you're saying God preferred the world above his own self-interest, above his own well-being. And
Right.
that is where Christianity is like, what? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're saying that right now. And ahava was already used that way in the Old Testament. It does still have it does still have the comparison times where it's just saying I prefer unfortunately the two examples I use in the Old Testament are this woman to that woman. It
Right.
also gets used a lot with like wives when they have multiple wives. This one or Rachel and Leah.
I was
This
gonna
one
yeah. Yeah.
this one I agape and this one I Mizia. Doesn't mean he actually hated the other one. He's just saying I preferred this one.
Right.
Good reason not to have multiple wives, right? But
Among other
in
reasons.
general, yeah, because it's kind of the same thing with the two masters. You're just naturally going to prefer one, apparently, because it happened all the time in the scriptures. Um, but now we're saying, no, if I say that I agape you, or if I tell you, Kyle, you should agape um, your sibling, I'm saying you should prefer your sibling above yourself and put all their needs in front of all of your needs.
Hmm.
So it's used that way a lot in the New Testament too. So where if I say you should agape someone, what I'm telling you is you should put their needs and their desires and their well-being above your own. Now we're to the altruistic version of love. Okay. Now, with that being said, um, that's something that um, is repurposed by Christians, but it was already kind of being used that way. But the fact that they use it about God and then they say that God agape not just like some of us. but the entire world, that's where kind of the shocker would come in. And so what you're saying is, despite whatever emotion that you think God has towards us, He chooses to prefer us and prefer our well-being over His own. Is what changed the world.
Mhm.
That's the heart of God, is what we're saying. Um, any questions there, Kyle?
Yeah, so I think with that then that leads that when we hear that, I think what a lot of people misinterpret it as being is that no matter that altruistic meaning is that you can do whatever you want and still I still think God will still love you, but it's a different term. It's not that term of what things are. Is that fair?
No, yeah, I'm
Correct?
tracking with what you're saying. Yeah, so yes, it is unconditional. And in a sense, that's correct. I think what you're driving at is that that love is not tolerance for whatever you're going to do, whatever you want, and that's what love would have you do, because love just wants you to be happy.
Mhm.
That is a common way. If when you say that love's unconditional, that's where people's mind go. I can do whatever I want. That's not really how agape works. So there's a
Well,
good quote from.
it's not a mutual either at that point in time. If I'm choosing to say, well, because God loves me, I can do whatever I want. Well, then I'm not loving God back because I'm being selfish, and it gives me the ability to do whatever I want. Like that's not.
Yeah. So it's not a mutual thing, and even in addition to that, it's just not how agape works. So there's a caveat to be had there, but I think there's a good C.S. Lewis quote on this. So I'll read this to you real quick. It's really good. By the goodness and love of God, we mean nowadays almost exclusively His lovingness, and in this we may be right. And by love, in this context, most of us mean kindness, the desire to see others than the self happy. Not happy in this way or in that way, but just happy. What would really satisfy us would be a God who said, of anything we happen to like doing, what does it matter so long as you are contented? We want, in fact, not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven, a senile benevolence who, as they say, liked to see young people enjoying themselves, and whose plan for the universe was simply that it might be truly said at the end of the day, a good time was had by all. Not many people, I admit, would formulate a theology in precisely those terms, but a conception not very different lurks at the back of many minds. I do not claim to be the exception. I should very much like to live in a universe which was governed on such lines. But since it is abundantly clear that I don't, and since I have a reason to believe nevertheless that God is agape, I conclude that my conception of love needs correction. So yes, that is a common. That was the end of the C.S. Lewis quote. And yes, that is a common way of conceiving this, but we know that agape doesn't function that way. And this is how we know it. All right. So if we're going to transition to a very important aspect of agape, it's that the writers of the New Testament make it very clear that what shows us what agape is Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. It's the ultimate example of agape. First John 3:16 says this, Romans 5:8 says this. Basically it's the this is when they realized God is agape, basically, moment. It's the what they all point to. It had to have been a common thought process in Christianity, considering John and Paul both wrote it. Now, what this makes clear is that it's not functioning on what people wanted. I don't think any you could argue any of the apostles, any of the Jews, any of the Greeks or Romans who had no clue what was going on wanted Jesus to die, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely not.
Right. But instead, agape love wishes the well-being of the other and therefore functions on the level of need first and foremost. Though we didn't want it, God knew we needed it. And so therefore, he sent his son. to die on our behalf. So it functions on the level of need. And we know that love, agape love, functions this way.
Oh yeah,
We do. And the easiest way to see it is like with children. All
yeah.
right.
Take your
So
medicine.
like, yeah, they want to let's say the child wants to run out in the middle of the street.
Yeah,
Would it be a agape of me to to let them run out in the middle of the street and play out in the middle of the street? No,
right. They
because
want to
I
touch the
know there's
stove. It wouldn't be good for you to let them touch the
it
stove. Like
wouldn't be good for me to do
they're
that, right?
sick. They need to take medicine. They don't want to take the medicine, but they need to take their medicine to get better. It's not that you want them to be uncomfortable. Take the medicine. You know that for their well-being, it's these things.
Right. So we know it very well with children. I also think we know it with adults too. I'll just give like an example with my wife. Like she is, I mean, she may not be telling me, no, don't run out in the street, but she does tell me things like this all the time. Like I've told her it's a goal of mine to lose weight. And she reminds me that, maybe we should go this way and eat this tonight instead of that. Or maybe you should drink water instead of a soda. Um, that's not what I wanted to hear. I would rather have just drinking the soda.
Right.
But because my wife loves me, and not just loves me in like, you can do whatever you want, but loves me in a true agape, selfless way that wants what's best for me,
Hmm.
she's suggesting other types. And there's
Yeah.
other ways she does that as well.
And I would turn in to add in a practical, maybe impractical, and put this into perspective where I think we're at currently in our culture in a lot of ways is that I think especially the church has turned in, not across the board, but in many two cases way too often right now, is that justify their anger and their distaste towards people they disagree with by being able to use this and say, well, I'm just doing what I was called to do and calling people out on these things. When
Mhm.
that's the motive behind what you're doing is not really agape, because you have an alternative motive for calling them out on those things because you don't like it as well too, and so there's an anger and a hate in you, and that doesn't reflect what this is of God and what we're supposed to be doing with others. It's there may be a lot of those things that people that you disagree with are doing that you maybe in a situation where they have come and become followers and said claim the name of being Christianity and the name of Christ as well too at that point in time, that maybe you do need to have that conversation, but it needs to be done with for their well-being and for the well-being of others, not because I want it my way. And unfortunately, that's not the way it's getting done. I feel far too often currently in our society.
Right. So I completely agree. It comes down to a matter of the heart. Is it because you legitimately prefer them to yourself? I'm going to use the word prefer because I think it's
Yeah.
important to be consistent here. But is it that, or is it just that you want to be right about something, and so therefore you're telling them they're wrong?
You prefer the world that you want and the culture that you want more than you prefer them. And
Yeah,
that doesn't mean you still can't tell them, hey, you shouldn't do this because it's bad for you. And they may respond incorrectly back to you, but you're never going to get a positive response when you all you do is come out of like it's wrong because X, Y, and Z. Like that's
yeah,
counterintuitive to because
yeah,
of this. Like it plays out that way.
yeah. But there can be a genuine, just like my wife suggesting the water instead of the soft drink, right?
Right.
There can be it can be, I really don't think you should do this. I think you should do this. And they can be out of a genuine desire of well being, a
Right.
want for well being for the other individual.
But if she comes at you with, I'm tired of you being overweight and I want you to lose water right now. I drink water right now. That way you're not continuing to be a fat, lazy slob, whatever you want to say in that aspect. That that clearly is not an unselfish response to you. There's a selfish response in you doing that, which that's an extreme example, but I think you see that play out far too often in our culture,
Right.
especially from people who claim to be followers of Christ and claim to be doing it in the name of Christ is what's even more
Mhm.
harmful.
Yep. So, but what I'm saying is for God, for the podcast, the focus of the podcast is God's love.
Yep.
And God's love, I think constantly we have to make this reminder that God's love is constantly pushing us towards what is best and what is needed and what is best. What we needed was Jesus to die on our behalf. Um, and we're gonna flesh that out sometime. We're gonna do a whole podcast or two or three on the atonement. But God gave up His Son because it was what was needed for our well-being.
Right.
And so agape functions on that level first. I would say, like, you can see it with parents again. Parents is always a good example in my mind. Like, do I want the kids to get what they want? Well, first and foremost, I want them to be safe and I want them to do what's best. But what I really love or what I really enjoy is when their desires align with that, and then we can both get to the place where what is needed and what is best is already taken care of, and now it's just a matter of, am I going to do what I want to do, or am I going to do with them what they want to do? Well,
Right.
in that case, I want to put their wants in front of my own.
Right.
But the other two, like the what is needed and what is best, come first in agape, just like it does in parenting. I'm always going to if I'm a good parent, I should put what's needed first and what's best for them first above what they want. And God is infinitely wiser than I am, and infinitely more wiser than we are compared to how I am with my kids. So I should
Yep.
trust that He's working on that level. And that changes the whole dynamic. Now we're not talking about a God that just wants me to have fun and just wants me to have what I want, but He is genuinely desiring my best well-being, and He's genuinely desiring me to fulfill my full potential
Right.
that I was created for
Yep.
from the beginning. That's what His desire is.
Yep.
His preference is that, even to His own self-sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Now we're to the special love that is designated, and that's what we mean by agape. That's why we mean what we mean by agape. And absolutely, 100%, Kyle, the first thing you said, I totally agree. That agape, when we understand agape in that way, is
Mhm.
completely unconditional. It's a
Yep.
choice. God chose, in fact, read Romans 5:8. God demonstrated His love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So while He didn't have the lovey-dovey feelings towards us because we were probably considering Him our enemy. That's what Ephesians says. We considered Him our enemy, or we were enemies to Him in our mind. That's Colossians. While we were considering Him our enemy because we loved our sin, God showed His agape, showed His choice. He chose us over Himself and died on a cross, even when we hated Him and because we loved our sin. That's agape. It's preference, it's choice for someone else over yourself, regardless of your feelings towards them. That's when enemy love can really happen.
All right. Any closing thoughts to go along with before we move on?
No, that's the ending thought for tonight. I hope you have a clear understanding of the word agape. And when we say that the words God is love, we're saying God is agape. And when we say that, we're talking about in the special sense, the one that says, regardless of how you are reacting and responding to me, I'm going to choose you. I'm going to prefer you, even to the point where I'm willing to sacrifice myself for you. That's what we're saying. That's if we're saying the first episode was saying that God is love. Now we're defining it. That's what we're saying. And it's most fully revealed in the cross. Kyle, with that being said, do you have a song that comes to mind?
I actually don't this week. I tried to think of things. Part of what I knew you were going to go. I full disclosure, Christian asked me this question before, and I told him what it was. He said, "Well, hold on to that. We'll talk about it." And so I completely came into this with an authentic, not knowing what was going to be said. And you did bring me to. I see it differently now, and yeah, I see it in addition to. I should add, like
Mm-hmm.
my version is secondary to what it is, and that makes a lot more sense. But even so, thinking through at the end here, I don't think I have any songs that necessarily can point that out off the top of my head. Do you?
I think there's probably a couple on my playlist that we have up on YouTube. I just have to look. I'd have to look through and think and see which one it is. But yeah, there look through. And if you guys who are listening,
I was just going to say, if you're a
if
listener,
you have one that you think, oh, this is the perfect song for that, put it in the comments or let us know. We would love to put it on the playlist.
yeah,
And we'd love to hear from you, get some comments, and what are your thoughts on Agape after our discussion today? So
absolutely. We'll be working on getting that that playlist for the podcast out sooner than later, so we can start actually having on. We already have them coming up on YouTube, but we're going to try and compile a Spotify playlist that you can be able to go and look at and actually have all the songs we recommend to go along with what we're talking about. And Chris and I have pretty good taste in music, in my opinion, so it's good music to listen to in general anyway. Well, that will do it for episode number 3. To make sure you come back next week. Next week, we will have Mike Lyle, who is a friend and pastor of Chris and I's at Compassion Nazarene. He'll be joining us. What are we talking about in the next episode, Chris?
I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about the glory of God, the God of glory, and how that correlates or how it interacts with the fact that God is love. So I
Third
think it'll
day,
be really
show
good.
me your glory.
So I think it'll be good. And I'm really excited to have Mike on. He's a really good friend of ours, and I think you'll get a lot from him. He's got a lot of great insights. So
Yes, he does.
I'm looking
And
forward to that.
articulate in a way that great communicator to explain it in a way that makes a lot of sense. And it'll be a really good episode. And look forward to doing it and getting that out to you all. Make sure you like and subscribe if you have not. Comment like we mentioned before. Give us your thoughts, things you want to add for our listeners to have conversation. Keep it respectful as always. Again, thanks for listening. Have a great week.